So I'm going to be doing something a bit different today. I'm going to be analysing some of Conor McGregor's techniques. Now, I don't normally do videos about other people, but I was watching some old clips of him the other day when he was sort of in his prime, sort of 2015 to 2017 era. And there was a lot of things I noticed he's doing that I'm often speaking about on this channel. And I thought it would be a cool idea to do some analysis of his techniques and point those things out to you guys so you can see them live in action. Now, people often cite McGregor's power to come from his long arms and range, and that certainly plays a part in it. But it's a number of things in unison, and there's more to it than that I'm going to be covering in order of importance. And those are his biomechanics, his relaxation, his timing, and his accuracy. So the first thing we're going to speak about here is the biomechanics, and we'll look at McGregor's build to start with. So as you can see, he's got a very good build for striking. He's long and slender, as opposed to somebody like Chad Mendes, who is a similar height, but is more like a tank because he's got a predominantly wrestling style body. McGregor has much longer, more striking functional muscles. He's got those nice wide shoulders and stuff like that. So that's certainly going to play a part. All right, so the first thing that I want to illustrate before we even look at any mechanics of the punches is the way McGregor sets these punches up. So this was his first fight against Dustin Poirier. And if you look here, this is a very different type of setup to what you see most boxers do, where they're a little bit more front on. And this side stance immediately gives him a little bit more distance because this is the punching arm, the big, powerful left hand. Because he's side on like this, it means that there's a much greater distance to where that punch is being thrown as opposed to kind of a regular boxing stance. Because McGregor uses this very side-on stance, it means this punch, even though it didn't really catch Poirier flush, it just sort of caught him on the side of the temple, and that's because of the power of putting it from behind here. So this was his fight against Chad Mendes, and we can see this illustrated perfectly from this above angle. If I just rewind the clip a little bit, look at this stance. This is incredibly unusual to see. Like the punching arm is stacked so much further behind. Like normally, if this was a sort of regular boxing stance, like I've said, the hand would be more like here, which is a much shorter distance to travel. So this extra distance makes a massive difference. As you can see, he's bringing it right from behind, right through the target. And so this is something we can see he's obviously trained for. You know, he always works in that really nice side-on kind of karate stance, which is a stance I quite like to use as well. That was a good example there. You see how he is throwing that punch from really sort of side on. Not as much as maybe in some of the fights, but it's certainly something that he's worked on. I've noticed when he does his pad work, he always punches quite long, whereas some boxers tend to be really tight in their pad work. McGregor always makes sure to get that full extension in the punches. So he's already got that greater distance due to that very side-on stance. But one thing McGregor does absolutely masterfully, which is a lot more than anyone I've seen before actually, is he really, especially on his cross, puts his rear shoulder forward massively into the target, which makes a huge difference. So look at a couple of angles of this knockout of Chad Mendes again, because there's that nice above angle where we can really see the biomechanics of how he's moving, okay? And if we watch from this position here, so this is obviously the shoulder of the arm that he's going to be hitting him with, and look how much he essentially replaces those shoulders. So where the right shoulder is in position now, he brings the left shoulder so far forward to where he's almost like going to fall off balance in a way as he reaches through and then punches right through the target. And again, we've got that above angle to really, really illustrate this. Again, massive rotation through the body. Now, a lot of people don't do this, and they only, you can see how you can see his back here, right? A lot of people only sort of go to about here. And although that doesn't look like much different, say if his punching arm shoulder was back here, like a lot of people don't fully rotate, because he rotates so much, those extra inches make such a huge difference when the punch is traveling at such speed, right? And this is often called what is putting your weight behind a punch. But there's definitely a certain way of doing it related to things like having a stable base with the feet, nice long stance and low center of gravity as well. And this is also seen when he knocked out Jose Aldo as well, because even though this was a shorter punch because Aldo was lunging in so aggressively, so obviously McGregor didn't have the time to get fully rotated, you still see how he's really pushed this shoulder forward. This is something that people really need to focus on. Too many people are punching short and not letting that potential of the punch reach its sort of final position, you could say. So we can see from this angle, if we see here the lead shoulder and the rear shoulder, watch how they essentially replace one another. He really gets that one forward and this one comes back, really rotating into that punch. And this is something you see with a lot of fighters who are also considered to have big power. Although he's much smaller and just a pure boxer, Inoue does this a lot as well. So if we watch this footage here, as he knocks this guy out, this is something he tends to do really when he knows he's kind of got somebody, right? So you see here again, very similar to McGregor here, how he's in that big side stance. So the punching arm comes from a long way behind. Also, he's kind of adding a little shuffle step onto this, which is just going to compound the power even more as he lands. So as this foot plants into the floor like this, and then he's pushing off this back one, this powerful cross arm comes forward, although it does miss on this occasion. You see, very similar to McGregor, how his body is completely in the direction and rotated of that punch. He almost fell a little bit off balance there because it was so forceful, but obviously it didn't really matter in the end. So this allows you to get the maximum potential from this punch. So if you look at these two photographs here of me, one of them is with a big full extension and the other one is a shorter punch, because too many people under-rotate and only hit from here. And as I already said, although that doesn't look like much difference, it's massive when it actually comes to hitting somebody. And a weird little analogy to kind of explain this is like when you're looking down the scope of, say, a rifle or something like that, if you move kind of a millimeter from where you are, it's a tiny little amount from where you are, but the place where the round is going to strike the target is massive, because obviously if the distance compounds as it goes through. So that's just a little analogy that might help you to kind of understand the difference. So this is something I've personally trained a hell of a lot, and I'm always trying to emphasize it to my students, is that you want to really work on getting used to that rotation. And it will feel awkward at first, especially if you're used to not going as far, but you want to train and become familiar with it anyway. Despite, you know, you're not always going to hit at that level of rotation. That's not the point, but you do it so that when you want it and you want that range and you want that power, it's there. And this brings me to the final point on the biomechanics part of the video, where the clue is basically in the name, throw a punch. People say you throw a punch, right? And this is how you want to think about it. So when you throw a ball, the optimal place to release it is at the perfect time, when the arm fully extends at the apex of the technique, which basically just means at the height of it. And this is the same in really all your techniques, where your timing and technique is developed to such a level that when you land the punch or snap out the kick, it's at the absolute peak of its stored energetic potential. Any earlier, the power hasn't quite reached its potential, and any later, it's already started to dissipate. Just want to interrupt this video, guys, to let you know about my Telegram group, where I post different type of content that isn't quite applicable to YouTube, more kind of off-the-cuff stuff. So if you'd like to join, you can see the QR code that's on the screen now, or alternatively click the link in the description. Now, the next thing that we're going to talk about, which makes all of the other stuff work, if you don't do this, none of that's going to work for you, and that's relaxation. Because again, if you think of the analogy of throwing a ball, if you throw it with a big stiff and rigid arm, then it's not going to go anywhere. You have to be completely relaxed, and then you just release it at the final point. And to add to this, McGregor is also an incredibly relaxed fighter. And when relaxation's combined with good biomechanics, it's just a deadly combo. And many people are too tense in their striking, using muscular force, and they're essentially trying too hard. And that paradoxically makes your strikes less powerful, because power doesn't come from having muscles, it comes from good technique. And another thing McGregor does is really lets his punches go. He's not holding himself back, he's not stifling his movement by being too stiff and rigid. So back to the poor old Chad Mendes clip once again to illustrate. He just completely lets that punch go, almost like he's not even aiming at Mendes's chin here, and he's aiming somewhere around here, and he just punches straight through the target. You can see how he's still moving with that momentum of the punch even after it's gone way through Mendes's chin. Now, this reminds me of a quote I've heard from Bruce Lee in that quite famous interview, and I'm just going to play a clip of that now for you.
A karate punch is like an iron bar, whang. A kung fu punch is like an iron chain with an iron ball attached to the end, and it go whang, and it hurt inside.
So what Bruce is saying there is, if you get hit obviously with the pole, you know, which is analogous to just kind of like a stiff punch, you could say, it's still going to hurt. But if you then get hit with that pole after it's swinging on a chain, then it's a completely different story and a totally different level of power. And it's all to do with torque, which is essentially the force at which an object rotates around its axis. And the martial arts practitioner's ability to convert the energy through different rotational planes without losing any and wasting as little as possible is essentially what good technique is. And now we're going to talk about timing, which is something else that further compounds that power, because this is another thing McGregor does very, very masterfully, is his timing for his counterattacks when his opponents are rushing in towards him. So if you consider it, we've got two things going on there. We've got already the very good biomechanics of the punch, then combined with the fact that the opponent is actually moving in towards it. So it's bad enough just standing and getting punched, but if you're moving in like poor old Alvarez did right here, then you're just going to compound the power of that punch 10 times more. And he's not rushing in massively, but that distance from where Alvarez is trying to strike McGregor there, as his head's obviously like moving forwards, these few little inches that he moves just off of his center of gravity, is still going in the direction of that punch. to then meet McGregor's fist as he gets it right over the top makes a huge difference, again, with McGregor's already very elite level biomechanics of his punching technique. And I think really the most obvious example of this is the Aldo knockout, because Aldo was just so aggressive, so intent on coming forward. You can see how much he really moves into that punch. And again, as I mentioned earlier, although McGregor doesn't really get to full extension with it, it doesn't even matter because of the force that Aldo's rushing in. That punch would have just landed with such power, and he was just out for the count pretty much. And the last thing, which is the benefit of being a counter striker, is the surprise factor, which really compounds that power even more, because obviously the punches come, the opponents don't expect it, and it surprises them. There's no chance to brace against the impact, so they're pretty much just completely loose. There's no tension in the body at all, which is just going to be good night, really. So although this isn't directly related to how power is accumulated, McGregor's also very accurate with his strikes, and there's certain places you can hit someone, like on the jaw for instance, where it's much easier to knock them out than say on the side of the head due to the leverage of the neck and how it basically rocks your brain around inside your skull. And that resulted in a really high number of knockout finishes in his career. So if you look at McGregor's strikes during his matches and training, it's not that he's particularly fast to an outlier level, but what does stand out is how loose he is and his ability to basically let go, as I already mentioned earlier, which is really contributing to a lot of that power that we see. Remember that famous quote that McGregor said, which is, "Precision beats power and timing beats speed," and that's what you saw there. So something else to mention here, which is also a bit more of a biomechanics thing, is he also tends to hit people at the full range of his punches and not shorter, which is down to his understanding of distance and range. You can't always do this obviously because of the position of the opponent, but I've noticed when watching footage of McGregor that he has a tendency to land punches in this way. So again, we see the side-on stance that we mentioned here where he's throwing the punch from, but see how he is landing this almost at the full straight position of the punch as opposed to much shorter. Now, another way to highlight the importance of this and why I'm always talking about it in my content all the time is because if you imagine, say, a car rolling down a hill, if something is hit by the car as soon as it starts to roll, it's not going to cause too much damage. But now if you imagine the car getting all the way down the hill and it hits the same thing at the bottom, then the damage is going to be absolutely massive. And that's the difference of hitting someone potentially here or going right to the end of the strike and hitting them with that full body rotation. Again, it doesn't look like much difference, but it translates to a huge increase in power. Now, as I stated already, this isn't something you can always do depending on the position of the opponent, but if you watch this clip of Mike Tyson, which is just one that always makes me laugh because it's so brutal, he punches this guy with a straight right and he's nowhere near full extension, but when you're just as jacked as Tyson and ferocious, I don't think it really matters. But this is kind of like an example of where that's not applicable. But for somebody like McGregor who hasn't got maybe as much upper body strength, you know, like hitting at the punches longer, and especially for somebody like me who's like leaner and stuff, I find that that striking style lends itself well to hitting right at the end of the punches. But I mean, this guy just drops like an absolute tree, completely gone. So a little summary then of how all of these things connect to one another. We've got most importantly the biomechanics, and the two main things are that very side-on stance. So the punch comes from further away to the target and that distance gives more power, combined with the massive rotation of the body where it's essentially completely replacing those shoulders, punching right through the target with it often landing right at the apex of the punch, right at the end position on that full extension. And this is all done in a very relaxed manner with no opposing muscular contractions getting in the way of the punches. As I already said, he lets the punches go. He's not stiff and stifled stopping himself. He just lets them go like he's throwing a baseball or something like that. And this is commonly made more powerful because McGregor tends to strike his opponents as they're moving in towards him with a counter attack. So again, they basically run into an oncoming punch, which multiplies its power massively. And finally, his accuracy, the points at where he hits the opponent, where it's easier to knock somebody out, which technically doesn't make the punch more powerful, but to the person being knocked out, it probably is perceived as more powerful, especially if they just don't expect it coming and before they know it, they've been knocked out. So I hope you enjoyed that video, guys. Something a little bit different today, but again, many of the things that I cover on this channel, McGregor is doing. So if you want to learn more about this stuff, I've got plenty of videos teaching this kind of thing, so you can have a look through. And also, please join my Telegram where I post a different type of content that's not really applicable to YouTube. It's more kind of off-the-cuff stuff. Do some Q&A, some tutorials, mindset bits and things like that in there. And comment down below if you enjoyed the video, and I'll look at doing some more of these because I've got some other ideas as well. Thanks for watching, and I will see you next time.